Donald Trump's latest pivot to Russia was to blame President Zelensky for starting a war in his own country.
And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
From his safe, opulent estate in Mar-a-Lago, he criticized the Ukrainian president for not doing enough to stop the war without saying a word against the man, Vladimir Putin, who started it in the first place 3 year ago.
You have leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago.
It was the latest startling evidence of President Trump's apparent willingness to completely upend America's decades-long foreign policy, that Russia must be kept at arm's length, not trusted, and its allies protected. Today, on his Truth Social platform, he went further still. Think of it, a modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won. He refuses to have elections. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. He's right, hundreds of thousands have unnecessarily died in the war, and Russia's attacks did continue today in the city of Odessa. But what Donald Trump fails to do is criticize the aggressor, Vladimir Putin, whose unprovoked invasion has led to all the death and destruction. President Zelensky was already irritated after Ukraine and Europe were not invited to the peace talks between Russia and the US yesterday. So when he heard Trump's comments about him last night, he hit back, accusing the president of swallowing Putin's line.
So unfortunately, President Trump, who we respect a lot as a leader of the nation, unfortunately, he lives in this disinformation space. I would like Trump's team to have more truth. All of this definitely doesn't have a positive impact on Ukraine.
But it is playing right into Putin's hands. Today, the Russian leader unsurprisingly dismissed Ukraine's concerns and said the talks to end the war could only happen if his country and the United States trusted each other again.
As for the negotiating process, President Trump told me during our phone call that the U.S. assumes both Russia and Ukraine will take part in the negotiating process. Nobody is excluding Ukraine from this process, so there's no reason for such a reaction to the U.S.-Russia meeting.
U.S. politicians in Congress today couldn't believe the turn of events. Even Republicans were at pains to support Trump's latest outburst. But is he right to trust Putin?
Vladimir Putin is a gangster. He's a gangster with a black heart. He has Stalin's taste for blood. And as I've said in another context, I trust this guy like I trust gas stations sushi.
It's outrageous and not humorous that the president does these sorts of things, goes off on wild tangents and says things that are clearly false. What is really hurtful about this the most is what the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people that we know has taken place. Thousands have died defending their country, and for the president to argue that they were somehow the aggressor in this action is disgraceful.
Why do you think he is, Senator?
I have no idea why he does these things.
Is it his conversation with Putin, do you think?
I don't know the motive behind it, but it is disgraceful, inexcusable. He owes an apology to the people of Ukraine.
Today, America dispatched General Keith Kellogg, its special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, for talks in Kyiv. Perhaps that's some comfort for Zelensky. Less comforting are reports that Kellogg is himself being isolated from the process because Russia thinks he's too pro-Ukraine.
Well, joining me now is the Ukrainian MP, Lesia Vasylenko, and the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO Policy, Michael C. Ryan. Lesia Vasylenko, first of all, does your president speak for the country, do you think? Does he express Ukrainian irritation at what Donald Trump's coming out with?
Absolutely. When it comes to the analysis of foreign policies, Ukraine has always had one voice. And I'm an opposition MP, as you very well know, and still we are all speaking up in one voice, saying that what America today proposes for Ukraine is absolutely unacceptable.
And would you describe him as a dictator, or you living in martial law?
We are living in martial law because actually Russia has attacked Ukraine in 2014 and then escalated that very aggression to an all-out war. So we in Ukraine have no choice but to live in martial law in order to protect ourselves. But is President Zelensky a dictator? No. He is a president of a free democratic country which is fighting for its survival.
Michael C. Ryan, I mean, if we take aside the inaccuracies of what Donald Trump is saying, what's he actually trying to do here? What's he trying to achieve?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. He's either speaking to his political base or he's trying to shape the negotiations, which means manipulating the players in the negotiations one way or the other. So we have to look at actions, not words. When I was working in the Pentagon in the first Trump administration, we looked for decisions out of the White House and not so much the rhetoric, which, as I said, is used to shape negotiations or to appeal to the political base.
I mean, peace is a laudable ambition, but isn't he going about it the wrong way by alienating, you know, the key part in the negotiations?
Well, it's the beginning of a process, and the process remains to be seen. He took the initiative in his first administration to meet with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, which was completely atrocious at the time in everyone's perspective, as is this particular engagement with President Putin. However, when he finally met with the man twice, he walked away with no deal because he couldn't get what he wanted. So that may be the path we're going on this time. Bringing everyone into the negotiation at the right time is essential. The first meeting was to reestablish relationship between the United States and Russia. And immediately after that meeting, Secretary Rubio called the Quint, which is UK, France, Germany, and the EU foreign minister, to discuss the outcome of the meetings. So the process from the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense on down, and the Vice President to engage with European allies before and after the meeting is ongoing. So again, as I said, we have to look at actions, not words.
Lesya Vasylenko, what do you make of that? I mean, you know, is there action here that Ukraine can actually engage with if you put aside the war of words?
Before the war of words, Ukraine was absolutely hopeful that it would be exactly that, just a step in the peace process, yes, President Trump needs to start talking to Putin somehow, and many a leader has tried to talk to Putin. However, every single one of them walked away with nothing, because Putin doesn't reason, because Putin doesn't hear international law. Putin only hears his own totalitarian wish list, which is completely out of this world and somewhere in the realm of empires. However, this discussion which is taking place between President Trump and Putin is taking place without Ukraine, not even at the table or in the room, but even without Ukraine in the equation. And President Trump comes out of it calling the president of Ukraine names and calling on Ukraine, a multi-million nation, to make sacrifices and compromises with the aggressor, clearly confusing who the aggressor is and who the victim is.
Michael Ryan, I mean, isn't it just bizarre that Donald Trump hasn't said anything critical about Russian freedom of speech or freedom or democracy or even its conduct in the war, and yet is lambasting the Ukrainians?
Well, yes, I would not have written his remarks in the way they came out, certainly. And again, I go back to the point, he's the one managing a negotiation to reach a deal if it's possible, and he's chosen this pathway. But again, I go, there's more people in the government than President Trump. He makes the decisions and sets the pace. But Secretary Rubio has said all the right things. And outside his speech at the Munich Security Conference, the Vice President has said the right things. Keith Kellogg last year testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, said the only way to get Russia to negotiate is to make sure the Ukrainian army can clearly defeat them on the battlefield.
Well, I mean,
so those players are still in the game.
You mentioned J.D. Vance. I'm not sure whether you've seen his latest comments, but he's kind of sort of piling in like sort of the president's mate in a fight, you know, and sort of claiming that it's Zelensky who's wrong and that he's insulting the president. I mean, it's just a bizarre spectacle for the world to see this sort of playground fight. And it's hard to see how you get beyond it. You know, I understand, you know, the idea that there is a process, but hasn't Donald Trump blown it up?
Well, everyone's interests are still in play. Certainly, as Secretary Rubio said after the meetings yesterday, we want a just, durable, and lasting peace in Ukraine that can be acceptable to all the parties involved. That is still the goal. That is still in everybody's interest to achieve, and the process needs to move forward in that way. Yes, it's unfortunate that the president's remarks have caused a significant distraction from the real work of getting things done on the ground.
I mean, you know what it's like to work in that administration, and obviously the last time around, there were lots of people who worked in the administration out of a sort of a sense of patriotism rather than a support for Donald Trump. I mean, do you think there will be people in the State Department and the White House even tearing their hair out?
Well, that is the normal job of government, to tear one's hair out when the political level engages in certain behaviors. But as professionals, all committed to the outcome and working with our European and Ukrainian counterparts, we will get after this all day, every day. And as I said, it's a distraction. The president is using this line because he thinks it will be helpful in the end to achieve the deal that he wants. But as he did with North Korea, if the deal's not there, he will walk away.
Lesya Vasilenko, do you think it's more serious than that, you know, than just a distraction?
Well, I would absolutely love to have this positive, optimistic outlook as my interlocutor here. And I would actually even add to that perhaps this kind of rhetoric coming from the American president at this point in time will unite and mobilize the efforts in Europe to start doing more, to start taking defense and security in the European region more seriously, and that some sort of more firm leadership will emerge. That would be a great outcome. And then if the US president does not reach a deal and to unite with the newly mobilized efforts of European states, the American efforts, that would definitely bring a victory for democracy overall. That would be the optimistic picture that is being painted. But at the moment, words, they precede action. So unfortunately, when we're talking about a ceasefire with an aggressor who has been unable in the past to maintain even 24 hours of ceasefires, when we're talking about an election that is to be held place without the Russian troops retreating from Ukrainian territories, and when we are talking about international observers unable to reach some of the Ukrainian territories exactly because of that, we will not have a fair and free result of that election. And finally, to have a peace deal in these kind of circumstances will not guarantee just, fair, and long-term, main thing, long-term peace here.
Lesya Vasilenko, Michael C. Ryan, thank you both very much indeed for your time. Thank you.